truly equally equal in our ability to gain enlightenment, why is it that Buddha did not want nuns to be part of his community? He did. He admitted the nuns, but he was reluctant. They had to bug him, and then he made it a little more hard for them. And that's because many more nuns wanted to join than men, because they were having a harder time. So that's a sociological question. Nobody imagines that Buddha, because no modern person, I told you that already, no modern person imagines that Buddha was enlightenment and therefore capable of sociological judgment about the lack of tolerance of the male chauvinist Brahmins and other Indian patriarchal society place like India. So they always think it's some prejudice he had, but it isn't. It just said, all he said, but yeah, they can attain enlightenment more easily. It's just that the people won't tolerate it. It's like, the masters won't let their servants out of the house to go and get enlightened as easily as they will leave the house, So that's the reason. That's the first question. So, yeah, his displeasure was annoying for us today, but, he wasn't really displeased. He just was not going ahead, like he was very clever. Nowadays in Buddhist countries, Buddhist quote-unquote priests, they perform weddings, they do blessings, they do divinations, they do all the things the Brahmins did in Buddha's time. But Buddha said no, he wouldn't allow any monks to do that. Because why? If they had gone and challenged the livelihood of the Brahmin priests, they would have been killed, that's why. Because, like what happened to other religions, how many religious reformers or mystics or enlightened people in history in all of the different traditions who had something really great to say about the institutions of the time, how many of them got killed? Quite a few of them, if you look at the history. When they challenged the status quo and the power structure of the status quo. So he cleverly just went in between. He was a general. He was very smart. Okay. So I think maybe I'll come back to some of these questions. And the other thing about no I, there is an I. There is an ego. Do you know what ego is? It's the Greek pronoun. People don't know that because you all read Freud, I'm sure, at some time in your education in English. And Freud wrote, he never used the word ego in his German writings. He used the ich. Ich, in German means I. It's a pronoun. And ego is simply the Greek pronoun. And when the guy translated Freud into English, he thought, like all doctors do, it would sound more technical and far out if you used a Greek word. So we think ego is some high-tech thing that's lurking somewhere. It's just a pronoun, that's all it is. So everybody has a pronoun. What is the problem with the self is the absolute independent self that the unenlightened psycho person thinks is an unchanging essence inside themselves that is different from everything else in the universe. That's the one that's being rejected. When in the language there you hear no self, no ego, no this, no that. And it's not really being privileged particularly. They also rejects the existence of lots of things. Noses, ears, eyes, all kinds of things. I have to say, I was so pleased this time. Usually I love reading in this stage where we're introducing the Dharma. I'm very fond of the long discourses and the sutras in there, suttas in there. I have to always try to say the Pali word, not the Sanskrit word. Pali being more related to colloquial Indian speech in those days, apparently. It's so calm and so systematic. I marked a couple of things I'm going to maybe move over to read that I really liked in the Bhikkhu Bodhi. And Bhikkhu Bodhi is a terrific translator. I really liked him when he was talking about wisdom, and he said how the Western understanding of Buddhist wisdom is that it's non-conceptual, and that conceptual mind is a big problem, and that you have to make a sudden breakthrough, and then you have a non-conceptual, and you're enlightened. But I have a fun thing that I used to do. I haven't been visiting Zen centers lately, but I used to visit a lot of Zen centers. And my favorite thing was teasing them, because they are going on that idea of that's what wisdom is. You don't think about it. As long as you don't think, you'll be okay. So I say, well then please tell me, when Buddha was enlightenment, how come he didn't say first thing, duh? I'm sorry, but I think it's very fun. In other words, you can suppress your thinking and just, and you get a little buzz out of that. Because when you think, you're anxious all the time, you're worried. So if you just really stop any thinking, then you stop being anxious temporarily, and then that feels, wow, that feels like great. This must be enlightenment. And particularly since in the modern period we have an idea that there is no such thing as enlightenment, except AI, maybe computers will become enlightened, then naturally we assume that it's some sort of state of lobotomized, unthinking mind. And also I think people very much associated with what is one of the nicest times of the 24-hour day cycle? As far as you're concerned, a bunch of stressed out students. What is one of the best times of the day, a 24-hour day circle? What is it? Nap time. You go unconscious. Because it's been, again, a big worry all day long. You're getting here, going there, then you're just like, aha. It's really great. Right? Listen, I've been stressed out for 70 plus years. I know about it. And so people associate enlightenment with that. It must be some state where you're sort of out of your mind. Since having a mind is so irritating and annoying because it keeps worrying about everything. Right? So the idea that the discursive function of the mind, although when it is in control of us, basically the Buddha's teaching and his idea, he's so practical. That's why I enjoy reading some of these things. He's so very practical because if your mind is running you around, I got to do this, I got to have that, I'm worried about the other, you're hearing this inner voice, what they call the inner monologue of yourself, telling yourself all kinds of worrisome things, and Mark Twain, one of the great Dharma teachers in the world, you know what he said? He said, the worst things in my life never did happen. That's a total Dharma. In other words, he anticipates so many terrible things happening with our sort of human ability to foretaste and forecast and predict things that we want to avoid, which is healthy, of course, to a certain extent. But when it goes on all the time, it's debilitating. But on the other hand, if you're using your mind to analyze the world and discover two faculties in the mind in the Buddhist thing, which he displays very nicely, Bhikkhu Bodhi does. Two kinds. One is called shamatha, which means staying in peace. Shamasta, just like stand, sta, the verb in Sanskrit. And sham means peace, and or shama. And that's when you can just concentrate on one thing and not be interrupted by other thoughts. You might be thinking just down one line, or you might not be thinking, but just focusing your mind in a kind of trance. And that's a good training to do, to sort of shut down excessive agitation in the mind, is the shamatha. But by itself, does not lead to enlightenment, and such a level of concentration could be concentrated on the wrong things and lead person into a worse condition than they were before. And so by itself, it's just a neutral tool, and it's not exclusive at all to Buddhism. Then what's exclusive to Buddha's education system, or his teaching, is more this vipassana thing, which means sort of analytic seeing, or critical insight, something like that. And what that is using the discursive mind to analyze things, take them apart, find out how they tick, what is the cause, what is it all about, and then understand how it works. And of course, then the higher goals need the combination of this concentration and this critical analysis. And that's the famous so-called meditation. But actually, the word that is always translated by everybody as meditation, I notice Bhikkhu Bodhi doesn't really use it that much. He says cultivation when he's coming to that point, which I think is not bad. Actually, the word bhavana means, it comes from the verb bhu, which is to be or to become. And so bhavana is a making it come into being. So in a way, the best word for meditate, what we translate in the beginning of Western encounter with Buddhism as meditation all the time, the better might be realization, actually. And then the earlier discursive thinking part, that type of wisdom, that you could call meditation, like Descartes' meditations, And those are discursive writing, thinking. There's not necessarily sitting concentrated. So those are a few opening remarks. Now I just want to read my favorite sutra, several favorite sutras, at the beginning of the Digha Nikaya, which I hope was assigned for today. First is the Brahmajala Sutta, the supreme net. Well, and oh, by the way, all translations, I still don't approve of them. I still think they are not really quite good. And I'll just show you an example. All these suttas begin, thus have I heard, period, and then once. Right? And evam maya shrutam ekasmin samaye is the phrase in Sanskrit. But the sneaky thing that these old English translators were doing in the 19th century, but they thought they were just doing a good job with it. They weren't trying to do this consciously, but unconsciously. The once resonates with once upon a time, the introduction to a fairy tale. And then, thus have I heard is very vague, isn't it? Hey, what did you hear? It's like a rumor. I heard so-and-so did. That's like, you say that about a rumor, thus have I heard. Whereas what this phrase is, which includes the once with the first part, it's supposed to be thus is okay. Although really it should be so thus, but that's too ponderous, so thus, that's okay. Then instead of have I heard, I did hear. And I heard it on a special occasion, on a single occasion. That's very key, because what that is that's the statement of Ananda, who you may have already bumped into in among the readings, who was the Buddha's cousin, and he was his attendant, Shakyamuni's attendant. He was his fellow Sakya prince, and he he was an idiot savant who later became a saint and an enlightened person. But his idiot savant quality or ability had to do with he could listen to you for 2 hours and then repeat every word that you just said. He had a phenomenal memory. And so what he's saying at the beginning of anything that is authenticated in the tradition, at least, I mean, we don't know. Sometimes things were tampered and so forth. Westerners are sure they're all totally made up later, because they can't believe that a culture that wasn't British had such an amazing memory system going on, but it did. Before, not the Buddhists, the Vedic people had this. They could memorize like mad, like long things, and they had all these metrical things and these ways of keeping it intact from generation to generation. So what it means is, just thus so did I hear on a special occasion, is what it should say. And what that means is this comes from Ananda, who was present when the teaching was given. And it is a verbatim recording. It's a iPhone recording. It's an Ananda phone recording of exactly what the Buddha said. Supposedly, I mean, granted, we can never know all these kind of things, and we can be critical, and we can be suspicious. We can have hermeneutical suspicion, and so on. But at least within the tradition, it should be just thus did I hear at a certain occasion. Period. They don't have to say once the Lord was traveling. Then it begins. The Lord, the Bhagavan, and also Bhagavan, Lord for Bhagavan, is not really good. Bhagavan means one who has a share, one who has a fortune. So it's not, Lord is a feudal English word for the Lord, Foggy Bottom, who owns the palace over there, Downton Abbey, yes, my Lord, Lord. And maybe it has a justification in Indian language, because later on in India, Bhagavan became a general term for one of the gods, like Shiva, Vishnu, they would call him Bhagavan. But the earlier use of it is for the Buddha. And Bhagavan means something much less imposing than Lord. It means one who has a lucky guy, it means. Lucky one, fortunate one, Bhagavan means. So blessed one is okay when they say blessed one. But blessed Lord is taking it a little far, making him, trying to put him back in the Indian culture of his time as an authority figure, like a boss, a lord, They have words, pati, owner, that's like lord, adipati. There's words for lord, but Bhagavan is not really one of them. And the blessed is okay, actually. Since blessed does mean happy, lucky, fortunate, this kind of thing. It does. I kind of don't quite like blessed, because actually he's the one giving the blessings in a way, so rather than receiving them. But blessed is still okay. So anyway, so once the Bhagavan, so when you read Lord, it should be Bhagavan, and you put the once over, thus did I hear once. and better, ekasmin samaya is not the easiest way of saying one. Samaya is a very complicated word, which means a special occasion of a certain type. So it's a special word for time. It means like an occasion, a samaya. When people come together, that means. And like an appointment, it could be, or something like that. Samaya. It's not the ordinary word for time. And ekasmin is a single. So thus did I hear on a single occasion. Right? I heard it right straight through, and this is the real fact. That's what it should be. So I'm just telling you that. So I'm going to be reading in English to you, because that's one of the fun things in what's called global core courses, is reading and encouraging you to read so-called primary sources. But of course, these are not primary sources because they're translations. And translations always have the ideas and prejudices of the translator in them, unless it's a really great translation, like one of mine. Never mind. That's a joke. So the Buddha, the Bhagavan, was traveling along the main road between Rajagriha and Nalanda. Anyway, you read this, but there are a few things I would point out even in the beginning. And it's kind of a fun, dramatic situation where a student is quarreling with his teacher about the three jewels, as they call them, Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, the teacher, the teaching, and the community. And the teacher is a big Brahmin, Brahmadatta. And no, the teacher was Supiya, yeah. And then Brahmadatta was the student, and he was defending the Buddha, and the teacher was squabbling and criticizing the Buddha. So right away, the setting of it is where the student is rebelling against the teacher, and that's a really good thing. Because, wisdom, and this is why wisdom in English has slight problematic, because we think that old people are wise, but actually not necessarily. We can find out. They can be even stupider than young people. And the concept of prajna, or panya, as it is in the Pali, is a concept of a type of knowing that is really like super knowing. The pra means super, so it's really very intelligent knowing, very, very discerning knowing, almost transcending knowing, And so it's not kind of resignation, like we think of wisdom of the elder as like being resigned to fate. We have this kind of idea about wisdom in English. There are various connotations of the word, but the point is that so this is perfect. That it's a young one is defending the Buddha and the old one is criticizing him. Just perfect. It's very significant as to what was happening in the culture at that time. And then the Buddha figures it out. Again, everywhere the Lord, The Buddha figures it out, and then he finds out what's going on, and then he starts talking about all these false views. And it's a long list, 61 and 2 false views. I don't want to go through them because I want to get to my more favorite one, which is the second one. But still, it's very good. And another thing about the primary source, as you read it, you get a feeling of the culture, because of side details, like page 70 in my copy. It says, whereas some ascetics and Brahmins remain addicted to attending such shows as dancing, singing, music displays, recitations, hand music, cymbals and drums, fairy shows, acrobatic and conjuring tricks, combats of elephants, buffaloes, bulls, goats, rams, cocks, and quail, fighting with staves, boxing, wrestling, sham fights, parades, maneuvers, and military reviews. Sounds like cable TV. Totally. So it's a very rich, in other words, and then when they start talking about the different objects, the beds and the coverlets and the embroideries and all of this sort of thing, and different rugs, embroidered with gems or without, elephant, horse, or chariot rugs, choice spreads of antelope hide, couches with awnings or some with red cushions at both sides. But Gautama doesn't do that. But anyway, he doesn't even take pleasure in that. He's not. But then he goes into these worldviews. And I just want to look at a couple of them. The one that I really like, but I couldn't find it, I was looking for it again. The one that blew my mind after reading this 20 times over 20 years, there's one about someone who cannot be dissuaded from being a monotheist. That Brahma, even though Buddha never disagrees with the existence of God, he just says God did not create everything. He even has God saying so. Brahma, that is. But he says there's a certain type of person who can never convince of that. They're just absolutely fanatically determined that there's a single creator of the universe, and that's it. And Buddha's analysis of why, finally I noticed it after reading this many times. Sorry, I don't have this, it's in here somewhere. And is that when that person was Brahma in a previous time in the universe, a previous universe, because every one of you have been Brahma, and every being has been in Buddha's memory, in Buddha's idea. Anyway, thought he saw that. And there was this type of person fairly recently was a Brahma in another universe. And when they were there, remember the story, or maybe you haven't run into it, the story is that when a new universe emerges and beings descend from a sort of less physical to a coarser plane, and you have humans and animals and things, and hells and pretas, then the first being who comes from the beings sort of stored up in a kind of ethereal area, but still ignorant beings, and lands in the new one in a heavenly plane on the top tier of it, they're all alone. And then they're wondering why they're there, and we're trying to remember what's going on. They're very smart, but they were still like in a kind of state of trance before, for a long time. And then they're wondering what's happening. Then all the other ones show up. And then remember Brahma, well, you'll get to that sutta, you may not have yet read it, where then Brahma, the other beings say to the other ones who come afterwards, they say to him, when they see Brahma, they say, Dada, because they think he's their father, because he was preceded them there. And then he first says, I'm not your Dada, I just here first, like let's figure out what's going on. And then they get very freaked out. So then he says, okay, I'm Dada, it's okay, no problem. It's a thing like that. But this being who cannot be dissuaded about monotheism, monotheistic creator, Buddha says in this sutta, he says, when he was Brahma and he wondered where everybody was, and he sort of was lonely, he thought that his wish for company created the other beings. So he thought he was the creator at that time. He actually believed his own PR in that previous universe. So he thought he was the creator. And I wanted some other people, so then they showed up. Because I wanted them, so I created them. And then he never disabused himself of that in his whole time as the king of the universe. And therefore later when he's reborn as a human, he's sure there is someone like that. And it just blew my mind. Now, it's just whether or not, whatever, never mind. But point is that would be a way of analyzing things. It's like a shrink, who says, oh, you jump when you hear a certain sound because now you remembered in your dream when you were 3, somebody dropped a box on your head, it's a thing like that. So this is in many, many previous lives, that this happened to this person. And that's the way they do understand the way things happen to people. And, this multiple life as a common sense thing, the idea that there are multiple lives. So that's one thing that I love in this sutta. And otherwise, it sounds like there's a lot of people with a lot of weird views. But the other one that I want to point out to you, I want to read, he said, here a certain ascetic or Brahmin declares and holds the view, this is on page 85, in as far as this self, being furnished and endowed with the fivefold sense pleasures, indulges in them, then that is when the self realizes the highest nibbana here and now. So in other words, this is your libertine who thinks that's nibbana. That's one, wrong view, 58. Then 59 says, another says to him, sir, there is such a self as you say. I don't deny. This is this independent, unchanging, absolute self that people wrongly think they have in the center of their being. Their identity, their fixed identity. I don't deny it. But that is not where the self realizes the highest nibbana here and now. Why so? Because, sir, sense desires are impermanent, painful, and subject to change, and from their change and transformation there arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and distress. But when this self, detached from sense desires, detached from unwholesome states, enters and abides in the first jhana, the first contemplative state, which is accompanied by thinking and pondering and the delight and happiness born of detachment, that is when the self-realized highest nibbana, here and now. And that is when one enters the first jhana. Number 1 jhana is in Pali, dhyana in Sanskrit. That's the word from which Zen comes. Is this one. It's called immeasurable love state. And it's a state outside the desire realm. And it is a blissful thing to reach. And it's an immeasurable state. And one feels so happy that why it's called immeasurable love is because being free of all the sense agitation and all of the desires connected with the desire realm, one just feels very satisfied and a blissful happiness wells up inside, and then one wants everyone else to share that, and therefore that's love. I mean, one doesn't think about it, it just automatically flows toward them. And so that's the first jhana, which would seem like nirvana if somebody attained it in meditation. I'm sure there are many people since in other cultures who just from achieving that thought they were enlightened, for sure. Then wrong view 60 says, that was 59, and the next one says, but sir, there is such a self as you say, but that is not, that first jhana is not when the self attains nibbana. How so? Because on account of thinking and pondering, that is, in that first state of immeasurable love, you're still thinking and pondering, that state is considered gross. But when the self, by the subsiding of thinking and pondering, enters and abides in the second jhana, with inner tranquility and oneness of mind, which is free from thinking and pondering and is born of concentration, and still accompanied by delight and joy, that is when the self realizes the highest nibbana here and now. So that is the immeasurable compassion, jhana number 2. But this is a wrong view, though. That's not nibbana. Then 61, he says no, but now you have to go on and you get to the immeasurable joy and think that's nibbana, and he says no, that's not nibbana. Because this is a wrong view. Happy dwells one who has equanimity and mindfulness, and so enters and abides in the third jhana. That is when the self realizes the highest nibbana here and now. And then wrong view 62, the last of them, another says to him, sir, there is such a self as you say. I don't deny it, but that is not where the self experiences the highest nibbana here and now. Why so? Because the mind contains the idea of joy. And who needs joy? And that state is considered gross in comparison. Right? But when, with the abandonment of pleasure and pain, with the disappearance of previous joy and grief, one enters and abides in a state beyond pleasure and pain in the fourth jhana, which is purified by equanimity and mindfulness. And that is where the self realizes the highest nibbana here and now. And so that's right here. That's the fourth, immeasurable equanimity. And that's at the boundary between, and this realm here, which is also consists of 16 heavenly planes, planes of the form. This is a very important sort of, it's because it's referred to all the time, so if you get this little chart together, it's helpful to you. The 16 heavenly planes, and there are many gods who dwell in that, who were previously some yogis or yoginis who reached those, and then they thought they were so great they never wanted to leave, and they become reborn there. And this is where this is the formless realm, although again the word form may not be as good as the word, and these are all the form realm, as matter. Material and immaterial might be better. But form is, so it's in all your text, so I'm using form. And but it means material. So this is the sort of event horizon of the immaterial here. And this is also where Brahma's heaven is, which is the 16th layer of heavens, when you divide this not into 4 spaces, but in the 16 spaces of the form realm heavens. And this is called Akanishta, one which is not lesser than anything else. So in other words, it's the most magnificent and magnanimous state that an egocentric being can achieve. But he doesn't get into this here, but he does in other sutras. But then he goes even further, because actually one who reaches, but all he goes in that particular sutra is there, and that's number 62. But automatically, really, someone who's in this stage, who is that kind of yogi, who is doing what is called the critical insight of coarse and fine, they then feel it's fine, it's coarse, just to have even embodiment. Embodiment is coarse. So they then enter into an experience that is called infinite space. So, and it's not like they're floating in the space, it's like everything just is infinite space. So they feel they are that infinite space, and because they're predisposed to think they're finding their self, that's a very dangerous state from the Buddhist point of view. It's a great state from the Hindu point of view. But from the Buddhist point of view, it's a dangerous state because one will think that infinite space is the self, and it will seem totally disconnected from everything. So it's either a very high state of enlightenment, or it's a complete psychotic episode. From Buddhist point of view, it's a psychotic episode, because it seems like everything is that, and it's a kind of feeling of oneness. I call it the cheap oneness. and this is something I come back to again and again. I call it the cheap oneness. It's cheap because nobody's there except you, and you don't even see yourself as there. You just are it, and it's everything. So therefore, you don't even worry about anybody else, or they all disappeared. And it's cheap because it's easy to be all one with no one being one. So never mind. I'll come back to that. Then that space feels vast. You're in infinity in a way. You have an experience like infinity experience. And then your mind explodes to kind of be present everywhere in that. And that's more subtle, and you experience that infinite space as if it were infinite consciousness. So it's like infinite objectivity, then infinite subjectivity, and you feel even more vast and magnificent. You're not feeling this in a body at that time. It's pure inner concentration. And then that seems too intense, expanding infinitely, like infinite expansion, like a nuclear blast or something. And so then nice, dark, sweet sleep. You have an experience called akimjani ayatana, absolute nothingness. Nothing whatsoever. But of course it's not nothing, because we all know nothing is nothing, right? Everybody knows that. But it's a feeling like nothing, but it's dark is the point. It's not the bright and intense like the space and consciousness. And finally, the most subtle of all is this one, which is called beyond consciousness and unconsciousness. And that's, in some mystical traditions in India, that's considered the highest possible achievement. And all enlightened beings are in that achievement. And then they come back from that, of course, because from the Buddhist critique's point of view, it's still a relative state, because you entered it through a boundary and you leave it through a boundary. But the people who don't have a kind of scientific phenomenological analysis of it, they feel, well, yeah, it seems like that, but it wasn't like that, and now I'm back. But that's because there's a momentum of me being in a coarse body running around in India, and but now I'm holy because I disappeared completely. I'm really, to the sunless level, I disappeared. And so I'm really holy. When I die, when the momentum of my embodiment, biological momentum, ends, finally, then I'll just be there in that absolute. So it's like the absolute is waiting there for me, and then I become a holy man, and then I want to have a Rolls Royce and whatever. I want to behave like a big guru. So from Buddhist point of view, that's a terrible mistake, and even worse than coming back and misacting egotistically because you think you attained a state outside the world and you're going back to it and it's yours. Worse than that is you get so attached to the state that you leave your connection to your previous body and you become a deity of the formless realm. And you stay there an extremely long time, like aeons, past big bangs and big crunches. And then, however, since it is a created state, achieved by effort, insight, activity, and so forth, it has the seeds of its own destruction because it's created by condition and circumstance. And then you're suddenly back in the differentiated world, and in what form you really don't know, because you haven't finished this problem of you being separate from everything. You just had a big experience as if your separateness from everything was an absolute condition. And from Buddha's point of view, that's an error. And Buddha is very clear about that error. And he's just right there, he rejects, without going all the way into these subtleties, he rejects even these, which are immeasurable states. They're not infinite states, but they're immeasurable, meaning they are more or less infinite. Feeling, love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And the equanimity and the compassion and the love and the joy and the compassion and the love, they're all contained in them. So it isn't like the equanimity is numb or something. It's like loving, compassionate, joyful equanimity. And so that's why in Buddhism they make a huge thing, really, when it's really responsibly taught. They do not encourage people to meditate right away. They encourage them to learn something. And the Buddha is also very clear about that. You have to learn. If you look at the Eightfold Path, well, that's what we're going to talk about that today. If you look at it, then the learning is the realistic worldview, which involves learning and critical and thinking and meditating and analyzing, is the first branch. Samadhi, which is the meditative concentrated branch, is the last, eighth branch of the Eightfold Path. It's not the first branch. Because if one meditates and develops strong mental power from meditating, and that mental power is misdirected under the psychotic idea that I'm the one, I'm the center of it all, it will inevitably heighten the feeling of being the center of it all. In fact, that's whatever way it goes. And that's a big waste of the human opportunity, according to the Buddha's understanding of what a human being is capable of. Okay, now the Samanapala Sutta, I just particularly like this one, where thus did I hear on a special occasion, single occasion. The lucky one was staying at Rajagaha. That's a famous place he used to stay. In Jivaka Kumarabhacha's. The Jivaka was a famous doctor. He did brain surgery. He was a very brilliant and accomplished doctor. Doctor of the kings, and doctor of the Buddha, and doctor of the monks, and everybody. He was a great doctor. Had a big hospital. And he's there in a mango grove and so forth. At that time, King Ajatasattu Vedehiputta of Magadha. The Magadha is the kingdom of which Rajagaha is the capital. And this Ajatasattu is one of the Buddhist bad guys. He's not like Judas, sort of like Pilate or the Roman emperor or something like that. But he's really bad. He tried to kill the Buddha at one time. He did kill his mother and his father, starved them to death. He was actually going to cut them up with a sword, and then Jivaka stopped him from doing that, at least, but then he did starve them to death. And that's another story we'll come back to later. So he's a really bad guy. But now it's long after that, and he was misled by the Buddhist Judas, who was the Buddha's half-brother, called Devadatta. Because Devadatta was, became a sort of yogi sorcerer to compete with Buddha, and then he turned that king Ajatasattu, the crown prince Ajatasattu, against his father and mother, and then used the king to try to kill the Buddha himself also, and which he failed to do, luckily. But it was a lot of conflict there, actually. So Buddha was conflicting with him even when he was a prince. I think you ran into the story where this Devadatta fought him for the hand of Ashodhara in the tournament, and he defeated Devadatta. And then Devadatta also shot a swan, or a wild goose, I think, and then the swan fell. Then Buddha retrieved the swan, and then they had to go before the elders and debate, because the Ajatasattu said the hunter's code is when you shoot it, that's yours. And Buddha said, no, but the higher code is when you save its life, it's yours. And he won, Buddha won. Even when they were kids, So he was an old enemy of the Buddha. In a way, you can't blame him. Remember, Buddha's mother died, and Buddha was nursed by Devadatta's mother. So he felt kind of and Buddha was the crown prince, and Devadatta was not. So he was always lived in sibling jealousy of the Buddha the whole time. Anyway, now he's just being king. And he wants to go talk somewhere on the full moon, and to some sage person, the sort of the way he entertains himself. And then, you read it, where the Jivaka suggests he goes to see the Buddha instead of the other guys that he's already seen. And then he comes there, and of course he's not very low key. He comes with a procession of 500 elephants, 501 elephants, and torch bearers, and a huge royal parade. Goes to where the monks are staying in a mango grove. But when King Ajatasattu came to the mango grove, he felt fear and terror, and his hair stood on end. Because, of course, he has a very guilty conscience. He's a matricide, patricide, regicide, and nearly a Buddhacide. So he's paranoid, And feeling this fear and the rising of the hairs, the king said to Jivaka, friend Jivaka, you are not deceiving me, are you? You are not tricking me. You are not delivering me up to an enemy. How is it that from this great number of 1,250 monks, not a sneeze, a cough, or a shout is to be heard? Because the monks are all concentrated. They're all enlightened, lesser than the Buddha, but also quite enlightened. And Jivaka, no, have no fear, Your Majesty. I would not deceive you, or trick you, or deliver you up to an enemy. Approach, sire, approach. There are the lights burning in the round pavilion. So then he gets off his elephant, and then he carries on, goes up there, clutching his sword hilt, I'm sure. But then he's polite, and he goes, and then when he sees the monks like that, then he has a second paranoid thought. It's very interesting. He has a thought that his son is very unruly and unmanageable. But of course, he killed his father, right? So now he's worried about controlling his son. He feels he can't necessarily do that. Very, very Freudian. And So do your thoughts go to the one you love, your majesty? Bhagavan, Prince Udayabhadra, is very dear to me, if only he were possessed of the same calm as this order of monks. In other words, he wants him under control. But anyway, he's polite to Buddha, and then he says, he says, what's the use of this being a samana, being a bhikkhu, mendicant? Why should somebody be a mendicant, he says. What's the point of it? And there's other people who have professions, they do things, they're productive, they have skills, they have visible fruits of what they do, right? They themselves are delighted and pleased with this, as are their parents, children, and colleagues and friends, quote, bracket, and king, and they maintain and support ascetics and Brahmins.